Aurora International Airport in Guatemala City. By chance, a Mexican passenger was filming this particular journey's end. What none of the passengers knew was that a tropical storm had just passed over the airport. The runway was soaked, and the pilot was coming in too high and too fast. The plane skidded off the end of the runway and plowed into several structures. "210 people were on board. Despite the chaos, only 3 were hurt. Because the plane was equipped with emergency floor lights and escape slides, everyone got out alive. This flight could have had a tragic ending, as sometimes happens when we fail to heed the warnings of the air crash detectives.
For your flight, and we're going to do our best to make it safe and enjoyable. You can help us by paying close attention to the following safety instructions.
All carry-on items must be placed completely under the seat in front of you or in an overhead compartment. Use caution placing or removing items from the overhead bins.
Frequent flyers know this speech by heart, so they tune it out. They also know it's probably the most vital information they'll never need. Statistically, flying is by far the safest form of transportation. A passenger's odds of being involved in an accident are 1 in a million, thanks largely to the air crash detectives, whose job it is to investigate accidents to make sure they never happen again. American investigators work for the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, and this is one of their offices. In July 1996, a TWA jumbo jet Flight 800 was rocked by an explosion just minutes after takeoff. It crashed into the Atlantic, killing all 230 people aboard. It's the NTSB's job to solve such mysteries. The TWA disaster followed another tragedy that presented the NTSB with its most physically difficult investigation ever.
There has been a terrible air crash just northwest of Miami International Airport, a ValueJet DC-9.
The ValueJet DC-9 plummeted into the alligator-infested swamps of the Florida Everglades shortly after takeoff from Miami International Airport.
Very deep. We see people waiting out there, and it is very hard to believe that there is an airplane under all of this right now.
Where is the wreckage of this aircraft? I mean, it seems to be only just little pieces, bits and pieces.
Sources say the plane slammed nose first into the swamp at more than 300 miles per hour.
An eyewitness saw the jetliner nosedive at a 75-degree angle.
And he was doing, you know, a turn like that. I didn't know what was going on. And then after it turned up sideways, and that's when it started heading down. I mean, it went pretty much straight down. That's when I said, it's going to crash, it's going to crash. And then, boom, the thing just blew up.
At Washington's National Airport, the NTSB's elite GO team assembles. With no idea how long they'll be gone, they rushed in straight from their homes.
From the time we got the call to the time we launched the airplane with a full team going down to Miami, it was 3.5 hours, which was a very quick launch for us.
This is the first time outside cameras have been allowed to fly in with the GO team. In charge is Greg Feith, young, ambitious, and on his 3rd major investigation.
They're going to need at least 1 car.
NTSB investigators are always shadowed by a board member. In this case, it's their deputy chairman, Robert Francis.
Chairman.
He wants to know what we're going to do as an investigative team, how we're going to do it, because he will be responsible while he's on scene for addressing the press.
So far, all they know is a DC-9 went down in the Florida Everglades with 110 people on board.
There's a lot of adrenaline that's constantly pumping, and everyone was geared up. We know what we have to do, and we know that there's going to be a lot of assistance provided to us, but how are we going to pull this off? How are we actually going to get out there, get the wreckage, do what we have to do, and figure out what happened? And there's this silence that came over everybody, because I think the thought went through the entire cabin of that airplane, because we all looked out the window and we were all probably thinking the same thing. How are we going to do this?
Showtime.
Over to this side, more to your left.
Close to your buddy there.
Get close to your buddy.
Prefer not to, because they're going to lose
That's they want to start. Throw 8 minutes.
It really is showtime. Every NTSB investigation is carried out under the full glare of the media.
It was probably the most TV equipment I have seen in a very long time at any event, probably comparable to the Super Bowl. I mean, there was cameras and trucks and everything else.
The DC-9 disappeared in only 3 feet of water, but beneath lies an even deeper layer of thick, holding mud.
We got over the accident site, and all it was water. There were a few pieces of wreckage that were floating, and your first thought is, how far into the mud did it go, and what's it going to take to get it out of there?
The area around the crash site is awash with aviation fuel and hydraulic fluid. Sweltering in their protective clothing in the summer heat, local police search for wreckage and bodies in the alligator-infested swamp.
Going to the accident site is always different, but there's always the similarities. There's the smell of the fuel. If there's been a fire, there's the bad smells in airplane accidents. You get it on your boots, you get it on your clothes, you get it in your hotel room. It sticks with you. You know, you can get odors. Your nose gets used to it for a while, but then it's never quite gone. You leave the room, come back in, and it smells like an airplane accident.
Somewhere in these pieces of wreckage lie the vital clues that may help the investigators unlock the mystery of ValueJet Flight 592. Greg Feith's priority is to find the plane's 2 black boxes buried somewhere in the swamp. The flight data recorder contains an electronic record of what was happening to the plane, and the cockpit voice recorder tapes the pilot's conversation.
We used a lot of high-tech equipment, but in the long run, it was found with very low-tech equipment. That is, someone stepping on the boxes. One of the divers walked, and as he was stepping along, he actually kicked something that was fairly solid, stepped on it, and when he reached down and pulled it up, he found that it was one of the boxes.
Flight data recorder.
Got the recorder.
Well, that's what we've been searching for, huh? That's one of them. One of them? That's one.
The flight data recorder had received some impact damage, but for the most part, it was in good shape. But we don't want the magnetic tape to dry out. So what we do is we pack the flight data recorder in the cooler, submerged, and then make it watertight, and that is now its new home for the 4-hour trip to Washington that night.
They look at you like they're going to flip you off.
In the stifling heat and humidity of the Everglades, the search for more clues goes on. Out of 110 passengers, only the remains of 65 could be identified. Blackened wreckage and singed dollar bills pointed toward a fire in the aircraft. The discovery of the cockpit voice recorder confirmed it. The fire was so intense It melted the floor and seat frames.
There were verbal indications from the cockpit that there was fire in the passenger cabin.
Greg Feith made an astonishing discovery. 144 oxygen generators were being carried here in the cargo hold of the DC-9, in breach of regulations about hazardous cargo. They were described as empty, but NTSB investigators concluded they weren't. When they produce oxygen, they heat up to 900 degrees. Feith believes that one generator ignited during takeoff, started a chain reaction with the others, and caused the fire that burned through the cabin floor. The NTSB had already recommended that fire and smoke detectors be fitted in the cargo holds of aircraft.
We write these recommendations. We put them forward to not only the FAA, but to the industry, and we get responses back saying that, well, yes, we see this as a problem. However, it's an isolated case. Therefore, the economic impact that it may have does not warrant us taking action right now. We have now lost this aircraft, this ValueJet airplane with 110 people, presumably due to a fire, in a cargo hold that, had it had a detection system or a suppression system, may have given the flight crew some valuable time to get the airplane back to the airport. And while the accident may have occurred, it may not have been as catastrophic as it ended up being. What may have happened in the last minute of flight that we don't have information for is anyone's guess. None of us were there. You can probably picture, if you were in that situation, what might be going on. And as an investigator, it's hard not to do that. What these people were experiencing, what the flight crew was trying to do. You know, each of us has our own idea of what was probably happening, but it's anyone's guess, and your imagination can run wild with what was happening in that cockpit and in that cabin, given those circumstances.
This program is brought to you in part by Princess Cruises. Princess, let her take you away.
Far to the north of where you and I dwell, there lives a beautiful princess in a mystical kingdom. For a long time now, she's been the keeper of Alaska's many secrets.
Britain is the birthplace of air crash investigation. One of the toughest cases for the Air Accident Investigation Branch occurred on the 8th of January, 1989. A British Midland Boeing 737 was approaching East Midlands Airport when an engine fire forced the crew to shut down one engine. Passengers watched in horror as flames kept pouring out. The crew had shut down the wrong engine. The packed aircraft plunged into the embankment of the M1 motorway, just 100 yards short of the safety of the runway. 39 people died in the crumpled wreckage. Another 8 died in the hospital.
Confronted with a scene of absolute disaster, whether it be Lockerbie or Kegworth, the average reaction is, Jesus, where do you start here? Where do you start? Our job in life is to investigate accidents and serious incidents to civilian aircraft, and the object obviously is to find the causal factors for accidents and to propose recommendations to improve aviation safety, purely recommendations. I mean, this is really our workplace. A major accident scene is where we go to work. It's like a sergeant going to the theater, you know.
More than 40 years ago, a pioneering aircraft was supposed to make the British the world leaders in aviation. Instead, it made them pioneers in solving air disasters.
The Comet, her shapely silver moving into a still July evening in 1949 to take the air for the first time.
The British de Havilland Comet was revolutionary, the world's first jet passenger aircraft. It was set to change the face of air travel. Its maiden flight was typically British in its understatement.
Well, it was a fine day. It was July, and I said, right, if it's ready, wheel it out. And perfect weather.
It was a great moment for all who had planned and sponsored her. There at the controls, John Cunningham. A great moment, but an anxious moment too. Many hundreds of skilled men, the best brains and hands in the business, had put their utmost into her. What snags could possibly develop? And yet you kept your fingers crossed.
Went through the cockpit check and away.
And then came Cunningham's terse report from the cockpit. No snag.
It flew extremely smoothly and responded to controls in the best way that our de Havilland aircraft usually did.
6 weeks later, at the Farnborough Air Display, the Comet made her first public appearance to face the critical eye of the airman's world.
It was accepted not only by the public, of course, but by so many of the airlines that came and then wanted to fly in and see what this new aeroplane was. And the problem really was one of, could we build them quickly enough?
Stop! Here's Blazer!
In one great leap, it seemed the British would leave America's Boeing in the dust, with its rival 707 still on the drawing board. Orders for the Comet flooded in.
The chairback cuddles your spine as she surges down the runway. A gentle lift at no great speed, she's soaring towards the upper air.
Here was an airplane that had plenty of room in it from the pilot's point of view, a passenger's accommodation that was entirely in keeping with the best passenger airliner comfort, and a performance that was double what the best airliner could achieve at that time.
All the way up to 40,000 feet.
The Comet had everything, even huge picture windows for a spectacular view. And then disaster. The Comet was hit by a series of accidents. 2 were blamed on pilots not used to jet engines, but a third plane simply disintegrated in midair, killing all on board. Still more bad news. On January 10th, 1954, a Comet disappeared after taking off from Rome for London. Wreckage was found floating in the Mediterranean off the island of Elba. 6 crew and 29 passengers died. The aviation world held its breath. The future of jet travel was up in the air, and the Comet was grounded. With Britain's lead in aviation slipping away, Prime Minister Winston Churchill intervened. He ordered that the mystery of the Comet be solved at any price. Investigators converged on the Royal Aircraft establishment at Farnborough. An intense and desperate search began for the Comet's fatal flaw. All these early crash detectives knew was that the jet had broken up in midair.
When we started the investigation, we had a team of 4 permanent members of the accident section, and it was decided in the very early days that 2 of us would do the fuselage and 2 would do the wing. And then over the next period of 6 months or so, there was a succession of pieces brought back from the salvage team in the Mediterranean.
Thousands of pieces of wreckage were eventually brought back, catalogued, and painstakingly reassembled like a huge jigsaw puzzle. Now standard practice, but then revolutionary.
I think the scale of it was something new to us. We hadn't had such large aeroplanes to deal with that had been broken up like this.
Then the first clue. Investigators found marks on the outside of the plane made by objects from inside, and it happened in midair.
Now, if I were to make an impact mark with this pencil across here, this paper like that, now if I tear that paper like so, I now have two pieces of wreckage, which when reconstructed will show that the impact came first.
There were marks like this on the fuselage, in particular, a thin black line toward the tail section.
Now, in the very early days, one of the things that we found was that there is a strike running right along there, a black thin line, which we were able to recover some samples to give to the chemists, and they said it was a rubber compound which was found inside the fuselage furnishings. The other thing was that in the tail were bits of carpet trapped into the wreckage of this tail plane, and there was also an impression of a coin.
To investigators, the carpet and the coin proved that something had made the cabin rupture in midair, flinging its contents out. To find out why, they took a gamble. They sent a team of pilots and scientists up to fly a perilous mission in an unpressurized comet loaded with instruments. Would the same thing happen again? Ann Burns was one of the scientists involved.
Well, there were a lot of safety precautions. We had this parachutes which opened automatically in case one was thrown out of the aircraft unconscious. And when one got down to 13,000 foot, the parachute would open automatically. But this was rather embarrassing, as if you forgot to disarm your parachute. It would open inside the fuselage. There'd be a horrible crunching noise at the back, and your parachute would start ballooning out. I don't think people were very frightened or apprehensive. There's always that sort of feeling, it can't happen to me. Of course, one's very occupied with the instrumentation and everything. It was a great privilege to fly, take part. The real trouble was that we were flying unpressurized on the high-altitude flights, and that was very uncomfortable. People got the bends.
The aircrew and observers spent many tiring hours concentrating on their instruments. No chance of a smoke, but a peppermint helped.
Disappointingly, the scientists came back with no answers. Perhaps they needed to test the comet under pressure. They came up with an ingenious answer, a way of putting the aircraft through a lifetime of flights within a few weeks, with no danger to a crew. The fuselage of a comet was put into a tank with the wings protruding. The tank was then filled with water. More water was pumped under pressure into the cabin. The water pressure inside the cabin could then be raised and lowered to simulate climbing up to 41,000 feet and descending again without the aircraft ever leaving the ground. Day after day, the pressure test went on with no results, while the pressure to let the jet fly mounted. In March 1954, the comet again took to the skies. 2 weeks later, another one crashed, killing all on board. The comet was grounded indefinitely.
In that first 2.5 weeks, we had got to the stage of simulating about 1,900 separate flights. And I happened to be on my in my bed at night having a rest period when the phone rang, and it was my colleague back on the tank there. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. He said, "Oh, you better come in, we've got a failure." So he said, "You what? Got a failure? Not already, surely?" He said, "Yes, we have." So they sent a car for me then to pick me up, take me into the RAE. And then by that time, they'd got the tank drained down, and it was a failure, all right. The fuselage was split more or less from end to end. Initial reaction was, well, one of disbelief, and said, well, you know, either there's something wrong with the test, or there's, you know, there's something here we don't know about. Of course, it was something we didn't know about.
They had come face to face with aviation's newest problem, metal fatigue in pressurized aircraft. The Comet's huge windows weakened the structure. Finding this flaw sealed the reputation of British investigators, but doomed the Comet.
It was a disaster, really, because the Comet was very much a pioneer airplane. It was more highly developed than any other civil aircraft, and the whole hopes of British civil aviation really depended very strongly on how successful the Comets were.
The Comet was redesigned, but its reputation never recovered. The investigation's real beneficiaries were Americans, who learned crucial lessons in designing and building pressurized jets. They went on to dominate the world. But 20 years later, a design flaw in an American aircraft led to the biggest scandal in aviation history. View Forest, 20 miles north of Paris, March 3rd, 1974. A Turkish Airlines DC-10 on its way to London plowed through these trees at 500 miles an hour. All 346 people on board, most of them British, were killed. 15 entire families were wiped out.
These are all new trees here, aren't they?
Yes. Michel Vigier was the chief French investigator, and Tony Cullen was a Royal Air Force pathologist on his team.
Well, it was the biggest air crash in the world at that moment. DC-10 completely destroyed.
I couldn't believe that a DC-10 could be devastated in such a way. One imagines that an aeroplane will stay more or less an aeroplane shape, but you wouldn't have known it was an aeroplane, really. There were bits of aeroplane and bits of baggage and bits of seats and so on just hanging from the trees, and it looked like a Christmas tree. I don't suppose for 1 minute that any of them really knew what was happening.
More than 20 years later, the forest is still littered with debris.
In fact, there's some wreckage over there. Yeah. This was the size of quite a lot of the wreckage at the time. See, we've got some electric cable here. Yes. And seat upholstery and all sorts of stuff. Gosh. It's quite eerie, really, isn't it? But they can't clear up everything.
A discovery 9 miles away helped clear up what caused the accident. A farmer found 6 bodies still strapped in their seats. Near them was the rear cargo door. A baggage handler at Paris's Orly Airport was immediately blamed for improperly closing the door. But this wasn't the first accident involving a DC-10 and its cargo door.
Aviation community has got previous alerts, so it's easy to deduce that this accident should have not occurred.
In 1972, just 2 years before the Paris disaster, an American Airlines DC-10 lost all of its cabin pressure and most of its flight controls when the cargo door suddenly blew open over Windsor, Ontario. The captain was Bryce McCormick.
Well, I'm very conscious of schedule all the time. We were a little late getting out of Los Angeles, and they were having some trouble with the door closing at that time. And the cargo handler couldn't seem to get the handle down. So he applied his knee to the handle and pushed on it with his knee, and it went closed. But the air vent door to release the pressurization stayed cocked a little bit, which was an indication that it wasn't properly closed, but he didn't realize it. And he thought about it, so he called a mechanic over to take a look at it. And the mechanic thought 707 door, that's all he'd been trained on. He hadn't been trained on the cargo door on the DC-10. So he thought, well, it'll blow shut from pressurization.
The door, this particular baggage door that's been the subject of all this, is not what we call a plug door. A plug door is one that of the type that you sit next to in a cabin, where the more the pressure is inside compared to the outside, that door will seal itself more. The baggage door is a different thing. It's essentially hinged so that it'll open on the outside, from the outside, for obvious reasons. It makes it a lot easier to open the door and store things and so forth. Well, given that situation, given the pressure inside being higher, it's obvious you have to be very careful to lock that door.
Investigators concluded that the cargo door on Bryce McCormick's plane wasn't locked. At 10,000 feet, it tore open. The sudden loss of pressure caused the floor at the rear of the aircraft to collapse, which in turn severed most of the flight controls. Only the pilot's skill saved the day.
My headset flew off, and I was hit in the face with a lot of dirt, dust, and rivets. Every airplane comes out of the factory, they just cannot get it absolutely clean, spotless. Give it one depressurization, it'll clean it.
After the accident, the NTSB urged the Federal Aviation Administration to recall all DC-10s so their cargo doors could be fixed. But the FAA is both the regulator and the promoter of aviation, and is often accused of being cozy with the very industry it's supposed to control. In a gentleman's agreement with McDonnell Douglas, the FAA changed the proposed recall to a mere recommendation that airlines fix their planes. By the time of the Paris crash 2 years later, airlines had lodged more than 100 complaints about the design of the cargo door. It took the loss of 346 people to get it fixed. What air crash detectives call tombstone technology.
Certainly after the Windsor, Ontario incident, we felt that this was perhaps an avoidable accident. And that is very sad, because the whole purpose of accident investigation is to find the cause so that accidents may be avoided.
The Paris accident was a landmark in the history of aviation, in the sheer number of casualties, the litigation, and the damages.
And I see people are finding little pieces and putting them on the memorial still.
That's a poem in memory of the victims, and for eternity that part of the earth will be a holy part.
Makes you realize the magnitude of the disaster when you see all these names.
There is only part of the names of the victims. Turkish, English, Japanese,
French.
Some French.
McDonnell Douglas never admitted responsibility for the problems with the cargo door, but their lawyers and insurers eventually agreed to a multi-million-dollar settlement on behalf of the victims of the Paris crash.
We come with a job to do, and we try and be professional about it and not to let our emotions interfere with our job. I find actually this visit more emotional than the first one, which may be surprising, but to me, coming back, as it were, 22 years later is more moving than the first visit, because we were there to do a job and find out what had happened, and we were busy. And this is something I've never done before. So.
Tragedy would strike again on a plane sitting perfectly still in a cabin that turned into a death trap.
This morning at 0830 hours UTC at Cranfield here, there was an accident involving a Piper Aztec aircraft.
Eddie Trimble is a senior investigator with the British Air Accident Investigation Branch. Every summer, he helps run a course for would-be investigators.
Cranfield. We'll show you where it is. The Aztec is roughly in this position here, and it's gone into the southern edge of the woods.
Most countries now have their own crash detectives, and many are trained here at Cranfield in England.
To the left, the airstream for just like a hit on the left side and the aircraft will be on the left side.
All right, gentlemen, another 5 minutes, and then we'll leave Team 1 on site, okay? 5 minutes. Basically, it's to teach them the general approach to accident investigation, and it's really the same procedure you use here as you will use in a major accident. All you've got in a bigger aircraft is more complexity in the systems. They've been listening to lectures for 4 weeks on all aspects of air accident investigation. They've had a lot of presentations from our guys on real accidents, mostly major accidents, civil and military accidents. And this is really the first chance they've had to put that together and to actually go hands-on and employ the techniques that they've been taught, you know.
Investigators learn not just the cause of accidents, but how to survive them.
With the best will in the world, as long as people design, build, and fly aircraft, there are going to be accidents by the sheer nature of the business. Hopefully the rate will reduce over the years. But that being so, and particularly in view of the fact that aircraft are being designed to carry more and more passengers, it makes good sense to try and draw the survivability lessons from accidents. Now, people will say to you, yes, but we design aircraft to fly, not to crash. Fair enough. I dare say the car manufacturers will respond that they design cars to be driven, not to crash, but they know they're going to crash, and they take sensible precautions based on modern technology, and it doesn't seem to stop car selling. In fact, there is an argument that safety sells cars. We have the technology to do it, there's no question of it. The only question is, are we going to do it before we have a 1,000-seater aircraft?
Eddie Trimble is still haunted by a tragedy from 1985 at Manchester Airport. It became a landmark for British investigators because it showed airplanes aren't built for survival. The Boeing 737 never even left the ground, yet 55 people died. Seconds before takeoff, a piece of the left-hand engine suddenly flew out and pierced a panel under the wing. Fuel gushed out and burst into flames, engulfing the rear of the plane. In seconds, the cabin filled with smoke. The crew couldn't see anything and thought a tire had blown. Behind them, pandemonium broke out as passengers climbed over the seats and each other to try to escape. Packed in the narrow aisle, choking on fumes, some passed out. As the fire raced through the cabin, plastic fittings and foam upholstery fed the heat and poisonous fumes. The scramble to get out heated up too.
Now, there was 2 young girls, roughly 18 to 20, sat in seats E and F at row 10, which is the overwing row. And they were coming under a lot of pressure from other passengers to open the overwing exit. Now, obviously, passengers don't have any practice in operating such exits. And she looked at the emergency hatch, and she pulled on the armrest, which in that position is actually affixed to the hatch.
thinking that would unhitch the hatch. Her friend, who was sat in seat 10E, looked up and saw the emergency pull placard at the top of the door, and she stood up, reached and pulled the handle. The door, which weighed 48 pounds, then pivoted about its lower edge inboards and fell across the first girl in the seat, effectively trapping her in her seat. A passenger sat immediately behind them, I think his name was a Mr. Coxon, grabbed the hatch and manhandled it over and put it on seat 11D. And then people began to get out of the oval wing.
The Manchester accident left a lasting impression on Eddie Trimble and on the parents of Sarah Beckett, one of the victims. In the years since, the Becketts have become passionate campaigners for safer cabins.
It hadn't crashed. It was just a craft that hadn't taken off. You know, as you said, the fire service was in attendance within 2 minutes. It had half the exits open. Why did 55 die? You know, and I think it's those sort of questions that push us. We needed to know the answers.
The AIB themselves had said this should have been a survivable accident. So what was it in the cabin environment that prevented 55 people from getting out of that plane alive?
The real question was, what was missing that could have saved their lives? Eddie Trimble lobbied Britain's Civil Aviation Authority to provide passengers with smoke hoods. The CAA refused, although it required the installation of floor lights and fire-resistant seats.
We recommended that the CAA urgently formulate a requirement for the provision of smoke hood protection to passengers to cater for those kind of instances.
Whilst the investigation being going on and whilst comments are being made, we've got total faith that the thing was being resolved. When the statement was made in December '88 by the CAA that they weren't going to pursue smoke hoods, we suddenly thought, hang on a minute, there was a total knot formed in the stomach to say we've been conned.
There was other recommendations on, as I've discussed, the question of the forward bulkhead, the question of the oval wing. In fact, I think it was recommended in the Manchester report that the row 10, the row of seats, should be taken out. And obviously something less than that was eventually decided upon by the regulatory side.
Survivors complained to investigators that others couldn't escape because the doors were too narrow.
In any building, fire regulations stipulate that it has to be 30 inches. An ordinary door is 2 feet 6 inches wide. That's been researched out of sight. Why is it necessary for the aviation industry to think that it's anything different? It's arguably more dangerous. So it is not exactly the scientific breakthrough of the century to have a door increase from 20 inches to 30 inches and to see that implemented and for it to be safer to fly.
I think when you read through passenger testimony and when you meet those survivors and when you look at the photographs taken by the fire crew of the scene in that cabin, then you do become fairly motivated to try and do something about it. That essentially is our job.
It's been a challenge that has had the best motivation in the world. You can't have a better motivation than losing a daughter. All we can do is to try and bring it to the public attention, just to remind them of their responsibilities. And their responsibilities are to us as the flying passenger, not just to the commercial interests of airlines and airline operators.
Air crash detectives do more than solve accidents. They try to prevent them from ever happening again.
No.
But their work is in vain if their recommendations go unheeded.
For every 20 investigations made by investigation units out of major accidents, only a handful are ever implemented, you know. And unless the lessons are learnt and implemented in this business, we're not making as good progress as we can. And frankly, a lot of investigators may as well go and lie on a beach
is do accident investigation as long as that pertains.
Tomorrow, Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and many more. Stories from those that knew them. The Rock. Then examine the greatest prison escapes of all time. How'd they escape Alcatraz on Discovery Sunday? Explore your world.